I've been wanting to do a video on this for a while now, as it deals with a topic that I have a lot of personal interest in: playing retro classic games via modern hardware and or software. As these older games and consoles start to wear out and die, newer hardware like the Mega SG and well-made software collections are going to increasingly become more attractive methods of playing these older games. Sure, you can always have your capacitors replaced, your RBG mods installed, and your discs resurfaced, all things that I recommend, but at the end of the day, all we're really doing is just buying time in the grand scheme of things. So I think it's always a good idea to be aware of all of the quality retro game compilations that are available for modern consoles. So let's take a look at some great ones available right now on your PS4. The first collection I want to bring up is the Sega Genesis Classics Collection. Now that I'm a proud owner of the mighty Mega SG, I probably won't play this collection as much going forward, but it's still totally worth having for the convenience factor alone, if nothing else. Not to mention, it also supports online multiplayer modes and leaderboards, so that right there should make it worth the price of admission for most of us. But thankfully, it also runs very accurate versions of these Genesis games, which do sometimes prove difficult to emulate. Between all of the online functionality, the abundance of handy display options, and a great selection of games, this is an excellent collection with plenty for hardcore fans of the Genesis and beginners alike. Next, I think it's a good idea to bring up the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle. This is unfortunately a digital-only collection, and as far as recording of this script, I've seen zero plans for a physical release. That may happen one day, but right now I don't see anything, and that kinda sucks. But that is the only negative thing I really have to say about it. For 20 bucks, you get 7 great arcade beat-em-ups from the late 80s and early 90s, and you can choose between Western and Eastern versions of each one, which is really nice. Switching regions doesn't really functionally change much, but it's neat to notice the differences here and there. As a cherry on top, every game supports online and local multiplayer. The games are great selections too. You can definitely tell some of them are older than the others, but they're all a lot of fun regardless, and as far as I know, this is one of the only, if not the only, modern way to play these particular games in one collection like this. Another digital-only collection for 20 bucks is Castlevania Requiem, but you get a lot less for that 20 bucks than you got with the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle. So while I do love the 2 games that are included, I don't recommend this quite as highly as I can everything else on the list, because it's really just those 2 games. For 20 bucks, they definitely could have given us more than that. I mean, Capcom gave us 7 and alternate versions of each game, but Konami only sees fit to have 2 here. Now, the 2 games that are here are great. They feature save states and they have some handy display options, so it's not like it's totally bare bones. And there's no denying that Symphony of the Night and Rondo of Blood are both masterpieces. They're really great games. So depending on what consoles you have and what games you already own, Requiem may or may not be worth it for you. Perhaps if they had thrown in Bloodlines or the original NES trilogy, then maybe this would be more universally recommendable. But as it stands, I think I'll just leave it up to you to decide. It does go on sale fairly often on PSN, so maybe if you are interested, keep an eye out for one of those. Back to the world of Capcom, we have the Mega Man collections. Now these are great as you can play all of the mainline Mega Man and Mega Man X games right there on your PS4. Now, I didn't grow up with Nintendo consoles or much of an interest in Mega Man generally, so these collections are perfect for me with the added benefits of being on a modern console and having them all in one place. As far as I can tell, all of the games run very well and they're a blast to play, albeit extremely difficult, especially the older ones. I particularly enjoy the Mega Man X games though. I tend to gravitate more towards Mega Man X, I guess. I think it's just because I prefer the 16 and 32-bit style over the 8-bit style most of the time, but they're all great and they're all super challenging, and there's a lot of content in both of these collections, including some music players, which is a great idea for these because these games have outstanding soundtracks. Shenmue I and II. Now, this is a collection I can pretty confidently recommend to anybody who's curious about the series and might be interested in the upcoming Shenmue III. Mostly because getting everything you need to play the original 2 games in their original form requires a bit of work. Even if you have managed to track down a Dreamcast, all 4 discs of the original Shenmue, an original Xbox, and then a copy of Shenmue II for that, this is still just a way more convenient way to play these games, and they're all in the best shape they've ever been in, and probably ever will be. Now, don't get me wrong, these are old games from a kind of tumultuous era where developers were still kind of figuring 3D stuff out, and they aren't really what I would call remastered either. I mean, they do run very well and they control very well, probably better than the original versions, but at the end of the day, these are really just optimized ports of the original 2 games, so don't expect any texture work or re-recorded voice acting here.
I don't think anybody's in.
All of the game's assets are still in their original state, and while that does retain their charm, I think, they also haven't aged as well as a lot of 16-bit and 8-bit games have, so just keep that in mind. That being said, this collection was long overdue when it came out, and I'm super glad it exists. The Shenmue games are slow, but once they get their hooks into you, you will realize why they are regarded as classics by so many. Now, this is an example of a retro collection that gets just about everything right. The SNK 40th Anniversary Collection has a ton of games, I think 25 or so. It has options to switch between regions and between arcade and console versions on some of them, and on top of all that, a very generous amount of original artwork from the 80s to pore over if you're interested. I really find this stuff fascinating, and I like when collections put stuff like this in. Now, I will be honest, some of the games aren't as fun as others, and you can tell that they were originally made to just suck quarters out of people's pockets, but from what I can tell, this does seem to be a fairly comprehensive representation of the SNK library. The selection mostly consists of shooters like the Atari Warriors games, with a couple of side-scrollers and random oddball games thrown in. The only thing I feel like it's missing is more fighting games. SNK is very well known for that genre, and there's only one fighting game on here, and it's far from their best. Other than that, this is arguably the most bang for your buck out of anything on this list in terms of content. Now, these games I've had a ton of fun with, the Atari Flashback collections. There's 3 volumes so far, and they're all pretty cheap, and they all include 50 games per volume. Some of them are maybe arcade games or different versions, but the vast majority of the content on each of the 3 volumes are legit Atari 2600 games, and I just adore pretty much all of them. The games all look and sound perfect despite the infamous AtGames being the company behind the ports. Honestly though, it isn't asking for much to get these games to run well on a PS4, so I'm not really sure how much praise they deserve for that, but regardless, you really have nothing to worry about with these particular Atari collections. The only thing I don't really like is how the on-screen switches work. You're supposed to be able to emulate the switches that were on the original 2600 console to toggle those options, but I find the way that they did it here to be very finicky and unintuitive in all 3 volumes. So not a huge deal, but something to be aware of. Thankfully, the charm of these games themselves makes you forget about that pretty quickly. Once you got a game that you're enjoying and you have it in the right mode that you want, you can really have a lot of fun. Now, I realize the Atari 2600 might not be for everybody since they are extremely rudimentary, but stay with me here. I really recommend trying at least one of these volumes out. They might not seem all that engaging at first, especially if you have no nostalgia for them, but trust me, get a couple of friends over, get some beers together, and I think you might be surprised with how fun some of these games can turn out to be. I do recommend Volume 1 and 2 over the third one though. Most of the real gems of the 2600 are pretty much either on Volume 1 or 2, so if you only want to get one of them, I say choose between the original 2, and only get the third volume if you just happen to want more. So that about does it for that. I'm glad I got around to making this, and I'm super thankful that we do have these collections to talk about. Lots of great companies like Hyperkin and Analog and software publishers all seem to realize that there is a lot of interest for these older games still out there. So as long as that interest remains, and there's money to be made on finding new ways to play these games, we should always have convenient ways to do so. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.